Have you ever heard a story so bizarre it makes you wonder if fate is playing tricks on us? In the world of crime, most things follow a logical path: motive, evidence, and a resolution. But sometimes reality takes a detour, throwing in twists so dark and strange they feel ripped straight from a thriller novel. And just how bizarre is the top story on our list? 10. The death of Ikbal Alhilly and her mysterious ex-husband. On September 5th, 2012, a gruesome and baffling crime unfolded in the serene mountainous region near Chevaline, France. Saad Alhilly, a British engineer, was on a peaceful family holiday with his wife Ikbal, their daughters Zainab and Zina, and Ikbal's mother, Suhaila. What should have been a day of scenic drives and fresh alpine air turned into a nightmare. That afternoon, as they drove through the isolated forest roads, their car was ambushed. The vehicle was forced off the road, and then, in a chilling act of violence, unknown assailants opened fire. When the smoke cleared, Saad, Ikbal, and Suhaila lay dead in the car. Remarkably, the two young girls survived: Zainab, injured but alive, and Zina, who had hidden in the car for hours after the attack. Despite an exhaustive investigation, the identity of the perpetrators and their motives remain unknown. The case has perplexed authorities for years, earning the grim moniker, "the perfect crime." But the mystery doesn't end there. In a twist that defies logic, Ikbal's past surfaced in the most unusual way. Few knew that her marriage to Saad was her second. In 1999, while working in the United States, Ikbal married Jim Thompson, a man she barely knew, solely to secure a green card. Their marriage dissolved within a year, and Ikbal returned to Europe, where she later met and married Saad, never disclosing her prior marriage to anyone. Here's where it gets strange. Just hours after Ikbal's brutal murder, her ex-husband, Jim Thompson, was found dead in Mississippi. The official report says it was a massive heart attack, but the timing, too close to be a coincidence. Jim had been perfectly healthy. What if it wasn't just a heart attack? What if someone somehow ensured he wouldn't be around to answer questions? The who and the why remain unknown, but one thing's for sure: Jim's sudden death only deepens the dark cloud of mystery hanging over this case. 9. The disappearances of the Palmer brothers. In the realm of missing persons, it's rare enough for two family members to vanish, but for them to disappear years apart and under completely different circumstances, that's almost unheard of. Yet, that's exactly what happened to the Palmer family in Wasilla, Alaska, a tragic tale of two brothers lost to the unknown. The story begins in 1999 with 15-year-old Michael Palmer, the youngest of three brothers. On the night of June 4th, Michael attended a graduation party with friends. The group decided to bike home in the early morning hours, but Michael lagged behind, falling out of sight. His friends assumed he'd catch up. He never did. When Michael didn't return home, his worried parents reported him missing. A search ensued, and soon after, Michael's bicycle was found submerged in a nearby river. His wet sneakers were discovered about 200 feet from the water's edge. But Michael? He had vanished without a trace. Despite extensive searches, his body was never found. The Palmer family's nightmare didn't end there. Fast forward 11 years to 2010, when 30-year-old Chucky Palmer, Michael's older brother, was enjoying a weekend getaway at a mountain cabin with friends and family. On the evening of April 13th, the group decided to take a snowmobile ride through the snowy terrain. Just like Michael, Chucky got separated from the group. When the others returned to the cabin, Chucky was nowhere to be found. The next day, searchers found his snowmobile abandoned, but Chucky had vanished, just as his brother had a decade before. Despite exhaustive efforts, no sign of Chucky ever emerged. Chris Palmer, the eldest brother, was left with the unimaginable burden of searching for not one but two missing siblings, separated by 11 years of unanswered questions. Twice he ventured out, hoping for a different ending, only to return home empty-handed, both brothers lost to the Alaskan wilderness. Two brothers, two disappearances, two unsolved mysteries. Was it a cruel twist of fate or something more sinister? The Palmer brothers' story remains one of Alaska's most haunting mysteries. 8. The murder victim who suffered from a rare disease. In the summer of 1964, 33-year-old Calvin Jones and his 23-year-old girlfriend, Sarah Tolbert, were navigating a stormy relationship in Philadelphia. On June 13th, what started as a routine drive home spiraled into a deadly confrontation. Fueled by rage during an argument, Calvin grabbed a rubber hose and struck Sarah 15 times, killing her in a fit of fury. In a panic, he drove around the city for hours with Sarah's lifeless body in the car, before finally surrendering himself at the police station. Given his past, he had previously served time for attempting to poison his ex-wife. It seemed like Calvin was destined for a long prison sentence. But this case took a bizarre twist that no one saw coming. As investigators delved into Sarah's death, they uncovered an astonishing detail. Sarah had been suffering from a rare and terminal blood disease. Medical experts determined that she had only a few hours to live at the time of the attack. 2 independent autopsies confirmed the grim prognosis. Whether or not Calvin had assaulted her, Sarah would have died that very night. The revelation turned the case on its head. With her death imminent regardless of Calvin's actions, the court couldn't convict him of murder. It was a rare intersection of crime and fate, leaving everyone wondering, was this justice or just a cruel twist of destiny? 7. Dennis Mahers' false conviction. On a chilly evening in Massachusetts, November 16, 1983, terror struck. A woman was brutally attacked and raped by a man wielding a knife. The next night, lightning struck twice. Another woman was attacked in the same spot, but this time, the victim managed to escape and alert the police. The fear in the community was palpable, and everyone wanted justice. Later that evening, he was picked up by the police, identified by both victims as their attacker. The case against him seemed airtight. Maher was a sergeant in the Army, often seen in a military jacket, and carried a knife, facts that lined up perfectly with the victims' descriptions. In the eyes of the law, he was guilty as charged. Maher was swiftly convicted, not only for the 2 assaults, but also for an unsolved rape from the previous summer. The result? A life sentence. Dennis Maher, an Army man, was now a prisoner. For 19 long years, Maher sat behind bars, proclaiming his innocence to deaf ears. That was until a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of the Innocence Project, a nonprofit dedicated to exonerating the wrongfully convicted. Through DNA testing, an option unavailable during Maher's original trial, they proved what Maher had been saying all along. He wasn't the man they were looking for. In 2003, Dennis Maher walked free, exonerated after nearly 2 decades of unjust incarceration. The twist? The very things that made him seem guilty, his military jacket, his knife, were just part of who he was, an innocent man caught in the crosshairs of a desperate quest for justice. 6. The Mary Morris murders. On the morning of October 12, 2000, Mary Henderson Morris, a 48-year-old resident of Houston, Texas, left her home for what seemed like an ordinary day. But by evening, her charred remains were found in her burned-out car, parked in a remote area. Her wedding ring? Gone. The mystery just beginning. Mary was a beloved wife and mother with no known enemies. So, who would want her dead? 3 days later, the plot thickened. Another woman's body was discovered under eerily similar circumstances. The victim, found in her car near the same location, was 39-year-old Mary McGinnis Morris. 2 women, both named Mary Morris, both found dead in their cars just days apart. Coincidence? The investigation suggested otherwise. Mary McGinnis Morris's death was especially chilling. Moments before she was killed, she had made a frantic 911 call, reporting that she was being attacked. Suspicion quickly fell on her husband, Mike Morris. He had an alibi, but the phone records told a different story. A 4-minute call from Mary's phone to Mike's was logged shortly after her desperate plea for help. Mike claimed he heard nothing, Just silence on the other end, before the line went dead. Was it a hit gone wrong? Did someone confuse the two Marys? The theory gained traction. A contract killer hired to murder Mary McGinnis Morris might have mistakenly killed Mary Henderson Morris first. The missing wedding ring could have been a token for the person who commissioned the hit, a grim confirmation that the job was done. But with no solid evidence, this sinister theory remained just that, a theory. To this day, both cases are unsolved. Two women with the same name, killed in strikingly similar ways. Coincidence or conspiracy? The truth remains as elusive as ever, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. 5. The disappearance of Stacy Peterson and her mother. In 2007, the small community of Bolingbrook, Illinois, was rocked by the disappearance of 23-year-old Stacy Peterson. Stacy was married to Drew Peterson, a police officer with a dark history and a penchant for younger wives, Stacy being his fourth. On October 28th, Stacy vanished without a trace. Given their tumultuous relationship and Drew's shady past, it didn't take long for fingers to point in his direction. 3 years earlier, Drew's third wife, Kathleen Savio, had been found dead in her bathtub. At the time, her death was ruled an accidental drowning. Convenient, considering Drew was the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. But Stacy's disappearance made investigators reconsider. With fresh eyes on Kathleen's case, it became clear this wasn't a simple accident. In 2009, Drew was charged and later convicted of Kathleen's murder, landing him a 38-year prison sentence. Even behind bars, Drew remains the prime suspect in Stacy's disappearance, though her body has never been found. But Stacy's vanishing act wasn't the first tragedy to strike her family. 9 years before Stacy disappeared, her mother, Christy, also vanished under suspicious circumstances. Christy was a troubled woman, battling addiction and run-ins with the law. She had 6 children, though 2 tragically died in the 1980s. Life didn't get easier after her divorce in 1990, when custody of the remaining children went to her ex-husband. By 1998, Christy was living with a boyfriend in Blue Island, Illinois. On March 11th of that year, she walked out of her home and was never seen again. No leads, no clues, just gone. Officially, both Stacy and her mother are still missing. Their case is cold, but their stories far from forgotten. 2 generations, 2 disappearances, and no answers. What are the odds? Coincidence or a dark thread of fate? The truth, like Stacy and Christy, remains hidden. 4. Couple reports murder before being charged with unrelated murder. Just after midnight on July 3, 1991, 21-year-old Kirsten Davis's road trip to Georgia was nearing its end. She had driven all the way from Colorado to visit relatives, but just 5 miles from her destination, tragedy struck. Another vehicle slammed into her station wagon from behind. Before she could react, someone in the other car pulled out a gun and shot Kirsten in the head, leaving her lifeless as her car careened off the road. Shortly after, a young married couple, Tracy and Karen Wilkes, stumbled upon the scene and called the police. It appeared they were good Samaritans, but what the police didn't know was that just 45 days later, Tracy and Karen would be the prime suspects in a chillingly similar crime. This time, one they committed themselves. On August 17, 1991, the Wilkes duo broke into the home of 69-year-old Morill Hudson. They robbed the place, set it on fire, and shot Hudson in the head 3 times before fleeing to Alabama. Their escape didn't last long. Tracy returned to retrieve some belongings and was promptly arrested. Karen was found soon after in Alabama, the murder weapon still in her possession. By August 23rd, both Tracy and Karen were charged with murder, burglary, and arson. As investigators pieced together the timeline, a disturbing question arose. Were Tracy and Karen responsible for Kirsten's murder too? The similarities were uncanny. But with no solid evidence linking them to the crime, the murder of Kirsten Davis remains an unsolved mystery, leaving her family and the authorities to wonder if the couple who reported her death were the ones who caused it. 3. The Lucia de Burk trial. One of the most notorious and baffling cases in Dutch criminal history was the trial of Lucia de Burk, a nurse whose case introduced the concept of coincidence as evidence. Working in the pediatric wards of 3 different hospitals in The Hague, Lucia seemed to be at the center of a string of tragic events. On September 4th, 2001, Lucia was on duty at Juliana Children's Hospital when a little girl died unexpectedly. What followed was even more unsettling. De Burk was consistently present during the deaths of several children. The pattern was disturbing, and soon her colleagues began to notice that the number of deaths seemed unusually high whenever de Burk was on shift. An investigation was launched, and the hospital concluded that many of the deaths were unnatural. Based on this, they decided to prosecute de Burk. On March 24, 2003, she was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 4 children and the attempted murder of 3 others. The catch? There was no physical evidence linking her to any of the deaths, nor any witnesses to the alleged crimes. Instead, the prosecution relied on something unexpected: statistics. They argued that de Burk's presence at the time of all these deaths could not have been a coincidence. An expert calculated the probability of this being a random occurrence, claiming it was 1 in 342 million. But there were those who believed de Burk had been wrongfully convicted. Supporters questioned the accuracy of the statistics presented at trial, arguing that they had been misused. A professor of mathematical statistics took the stand, asserting that the odds of de Burk being on duty during those deaths were actually 1 in 48, far more plausible than the prosecution's claim. The case was eventually brought before the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, which agreed that the statistics used to convict de Burk were deeply flawed. A new trial was ordered, and further investigation revealed that the deaths attributed to her were in fact natural. In 2010, after nearly a decade of legal battles, Lucia de Burk was acquitted and declared not guilty. Her case remains one of the most contentious in Dutch history, raising critical questions about the use of statistics in criminal trials and the dangers of assuming coincidence can prove guilt. Number 2, the case of Liquid Matthew. On December 6, 1983, a gruesome discovery was made in an undeveloped lot in Florida. The body of an unidentified Hispanic man was found, strangled, and discarded like trash. What made this case particularly strange was not just the murder itself, but the eerie notes found at the scene, which led the police to dub it the Liquid Matthew case. The first clue was a plastic bag containing a cryptic note with strange poetry. On one side, it read, "Once you're back on the track, you'll travel in night, so prepare your old self for a terrible fright. Now, the motive is clear, and the victim is too. You've got all the answers. Just follow the clues." The authorities soon realized this wasn't just odd poetry. It was a riddle. The riddle seemed to be leading them toward more clues. The next note was discovered taped to a road sign. It read, "Yes, Matthew is dead, but his body not felt. Those brains were not Matt's because his body did melt. For Billy threw Matt in some hot, boiling oil. To confuse the police for the mystery, they did toil." The notes seemed to paint a chilling, if nonsensical, picture. Who was Matthew? Why was his body melting? And who was Billy? As the investigation deepened, the mystery appeared even more complex. However, the truth behind these bizarre notes was far less sinister than anyone had imagined. It turned out that on Halloween night, 4 local churches had organized a mystery game. The participants were tasked with writing cryptic notes like the ones found at the crime scene and placing them around the area. But, due to an unexpected rainstorm, the game was canceled. The notes were left behind, scattered across the area, and remained in place for an entire month. By a strange twist of fate, one of these notes ended up in the same location where the body of a man, later identified as Francisco Patino Gutierrez, a Colombian sailor, was found. His murder, it turned out, was not some twisted mystery game gone wrong. It was related to drug trafficking. The confusion surrounding the notes, combined with the body's location, made the case one of the most baffling and oddly coincidental murder investigations in Florida's history. Before we get to the most mind-blowing story on our list, I'd like to thank you so much for making it to the end. If you're fascinated by cases like these, dark and twisted, be sure to check out our other videos, and if you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share, or leave a comment. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on even more unbelievable stories. Now buckle up, because the number one story is one you won't see coming. The Trunk Murders. Between 1927 and 1934, a chilling pattern of murders gripped Brighton, England. In a series of unsettling events, women were found dismembered and placed in small trunks, leaving the authorities and public shaken by the gruesome discoveries. The case, shrouded in mystery, became one of the most baffling crime sprees in British history. It all began in 1927 when the dismembered body of Minnie Boniati was discovered inside a trunk at Charing Cross Station in London. Her murderer, John Robinson, was quickly charged, convicted, and hanged. But this was just the start of a more sinister series of events. 7 years later, in 1934, 2 more dismembered bodies were found in trunks within a month of each other. On June 17th, the body of an unidentified woman was discovered at another station. She was 5 months pregnant, but her identity remained a mystery for some time. Adding to the horror, several parts of her body were missing, but they were discovered a day later at a different station. Despite the gruesome discovery, the victim's name and killer remained unknown. The case took a more personal twist when the police began searching residential areas, where they uncovered another trunk. This time, it contained the remains of 42-year-old Violet Kay, who had been missing since May. Violet's boyfriend, Tony Mancini, had told everyone she had gone to Paris. But when her trunk was found in Tony's apartment, suspicion immediately turned toward him. Tony was arrested and charged with her murder, but during the trial, his defense put forth an astonishing claim. They argued that Violet had been killed by someone else, and when Tony discovered her body, he panicked. Fearing he would be accused of her murder, he decided to dismember her body and stuff it into a trunk. Shockingly, the court accepted this story as plausible and acquitted him of all charges. Years later, in 1976, Tony Mancini confessed to killing Violet. But by then, he could not be tried again for the same crime, and his confession came too late to undo the peculiar twist of justice that had allowed him to walk free. To this day, the case remains one of the most unsettling and complex in the annals of British criminal history.